Have you ever prayed with all your heart and heard nothing? You kept asking. You kept believing. You kept waiting. But the answer never seemed to come. Maybe you've started wondering, God, are you even listening? If you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. Some of the greatest people in the Bible asked the very same question. And what they discovered completely changed the way they understood God's silence. Because here's the truth. God's silence never means God's absence. In fact, some of the greatest miracles in Scripture were already in motion during seasons when it seemed like heaven wasn't speaking at all. So today, I want you to stay with me until the very end. Because what you're about to hear may completely change the way you see the battle you're facing right now. But before we begin, I have one small favor to ask. If this message speaks to your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to Heavenly Messages of Hope. By subscribing, you'll never miss future messages designed to strengthen your faith and encourage your walk with God. And if you're watching today, I'd love to know where you're joining us from. Leave a comment below with your city, province, or country. It's always encouraging to see people from all over the world coming together to seek God's presence. If you know someone who's struggling through a difficult season, share this message with them. You never know how one message of hope can change someone's day. Now, let's discover why God sometimes seems silent during our hardest battles. And why that silence has never meant He has left you. Have you ever noticed that we usually measure God's presence by what we can see? When prayers are answered quickly. When doors begin to open. When life starts moving in the direction we hoped. It's easy to believe God is close. But what happens when none of that happens? When you keep praying, and nothing changes. When you keep trusting, and the silence continues. That's often when doubt begins to grow. Not because we've stopped believing in God, but because we don't understand why He seems so quiet. The truth is, God's silence has confused His people for thousands of years. Even David experienced it. David was called a man after God's own heart. He loved God deeply. He trusted Him. Yet there were moments when David cried out with complete honesty. In Psalm 13, he prayed, "How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" Those aren't the words of someone without faith. They're the words of someone who was hurting. David wasn't pretending everything was fine. He brought his pain directly to God. And that's an important lesson for us. Real faith doesn't mean pretending you have all the answers. Real faith means continuing to seek God even when you don't understand what He's doing. David didn't stop praying because heaven felt silent. He prayed even more. And something remarkable happened. Although his circumstances didn't always change immediately, his heart did. As David continued talking to God, fear slowly gave way to trust. Not because he suddenly understood everything, but because he remembered who God had always been. Sometimes, that's exactly what faith looks like. Not having every answer. Just refusing to let go of God while you're waiting for one. If you're in that season today, don't mistake God's silence for His absence. He may be doing His greatest work in places you cannot yet see. Because while you are waiting, God is already working. And one of the clearest examples of that is found in the life of Joseph. Joseph knew exactly what it felt like to live through God's silence. As a young man, God gave him dreams about his future. Those dreams were filled with hope. But almost immediately, everything began to fall apart. His own brothers betrayed him. They sold him into slavery. He was taken far from his home. Later, he was falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit. He lost his freedom. He ended up in prison. And while he was there, he helped people who promised they would remember him. But they forgot. Can you imagine how Joseph must have felt? Year after year. Waiting. Praying. Hoping. Wondering why God wasn't changing his situation. The Bible never tells us that God explained everything to Joseph during those years. There was no voice from heaven saying, "Don't worry, Joseph. Everything will make sense soon." Instead, there was silence. But here's what Joseph couldn't see. While he was waiting, God was preparing everything. Every delay, every disappointment, every closed door, was moving him toward the purpose God had planned from the beginning. When the right moment finally came, everything changed. In a single day, Joseph was brought before Pharaoh. The prisoner became a leader. The forgotten man became the one God used to save an entire nation. Looking back, it became clear that God had never abandoned him. He had been working behind the scenes the entire time. And maybe that's exactly what's happening in your life today. You may not understand why the answer hasn't come. You may not know why the waiting feels so long. But God's silence does not mean God has stopped working. Sometimes He is preparing you. Sometimes He is preparing the people around you. Sometimes He is preparing circumstances that you could never arrange on your own. Because God sees what we cannot see. He knows what tomorrow holds. And His timing is always greater than our understanding. That's why faith isn't believing that God will do everything immediately. Faith is trusting that God is working, even when nothing around you seems to be changing. So the real question isn't, why is God silent? The better question is, what is God preparing while I wait? Because that question changes everything. So, what do you do when heaven feels quiet? When you've prayed, waited, cried, and still don't see the answer? The first thing is simple. Don't stop talking to God. Silence can make us feel like our prayers aren't making any difference. But prayer isn't only about receiving answers. It's about staying connected to the one who already knows your heart. Sometimes we expect prayer to change our circumstances first. But many times, God begins by changing us. He gives us peace before He changes the situation. He gives us strength before He opens the next door. He gives us hope before we see the miracle. The second thing is, don't let your emotions become your guide. There will be days when you don't feel God's presence. There will be days when your faith feels weak. But God's faithfulness has never depended on our feelings. His promises remain true, even when our emotions change from one day to the next. That's why we walk by faith, not by what we feel in the moment. The third thing is, remember what God has already done. Think back to the times when He answered your prayers. The moments when He protected you. The doors He opened. The strength He gave you when you thought you couldn't keep going. If God was faithful then, He will still be faithful now. His character never changes. And finally, keep trusting God's timing. One of the hardest parts of faith is waiting. We want answers today. We want relief today. We want everything to make sense today. But God sees the whole picture. He knows what needs to happen before the answer arrives. He knows the people you'll meet, the opportunities you'll receive, the lessons your heart still needs to learn. Nothing is delayed by accident. If God has asked you to wait, there is a reason. And one day, you may look back and realize that what felt like God's silence was actually His protection, His preparation, and His love working in ways you couldn't yet understand. Because while you were waiting, God never stopped working. Before you leave today, I want you to remember one simple truth. God's silence has never meant God's absence. Just because you cannot see Him working, doesn't mean He has stopped working. There are seasons when God speaks loudly, and there are seasons when He speaks through waiting. Both are part of His purpose. If you're facing one of the hardest battles of your life right now, don't lose heart. The silence you're experiencing today may be preparing you for the answer you've been praying for. Keep praying. Keep trusting. Keep believing. Because the God who has carried you this far will not abandon you now. The Bible reminds us in Deuteronomy 31 verse 8. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. That promise hasn't changed. It is still true today. And it is true for you. So before this video ends, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell us. Have you ever gone through a season when God seemed silent? Or, what are you trusting God for today? Our community reads these comments every day. Many people pray for one another here. Your story may encourage someone who feels completely alone. If this message strengthened your faith, please take a moment to like this video. Subscribe to Heavenly Messages of Hope if you haven't already. And share this message with someone who needs to be reminded that God never abandons his children. You never know. One click could bring hope to someone who's been waiting to hear exactly this message. Thank you for spending these moments with me. May God fill your heart with peace, strengthen your faith, and remind you every single day that even in the silence, he has never left you. I'll see you in the next message. God bless you.